Hey guys, in today's video I want to show you guys how I go about painting this little granary. This building in this picture here, I stopped and snapped a picture of one day, is a granary that was in Mount Angel, Oregon, and I drove by it. It's one of the places you see on your way out to Silverton. I went out to the Oregon Gardens, which is a really cool place to visit if you ever are in that area in midsummer when it's in full bloom. It's beautiful. But this little town, Mount Angel, this is where this Blackbird Granary was, and sadly, in 2021, October of 2021, it burned to the ground. And so I was just really super thankful that I took the time and stopped on my way home and got a few pictures. It was a beautiful sunny day, as you can see, and so the light and shadow are really super great. So I want to paint it, and I thought I'd bring you guys along and show you how I go about doing that. So first of all, I am not going to paint every single thing that I see in this reference photo. So that's a good thing to think about. You don't need to paint everything you see. So obviously we've got these chain link fences, and we've got, you know, power. I'm going to put the power pole in it, but just because I like the lines that are going from pole to pole, but I don't want to put in like all the road and the truck and the trailer. I'm going to eliminate those things. So I have this drawn out onto my paper, and I've gone ahead and worked out a little bit of a color palette that I'm thinking will be nice for this. I've got some cobalt blue and burnt sienna and opera over here, a little bit more diluted here. Obviously it's way lighter. And I've got cobalt and cerulean, I'm thinking, for the sky. Cobalt and light red for these darker grayer blues for the shadow sides of these buildings. Light red and quinacridone gold made a really nice pop of an orange color against that blue. And then I've taken Viridian green, which I don't really use very often, but I like that mixed with this with light red. And I'll list all the supplies that I'm using in the description below. So when you're done, or if you feel like it, you can click on those links and get to where you can find those paints. This is Viridian green, and I put quinacridone gold, but I think it was actually Nicolazo yellow. It was a lighter, brighter yellow, so I could get this nice sunny green. But don't think you have to stick to the colors I am using when you're painting, you know, say a building structure with similar coloring. Figure out your own color palette. Just realize that a blue with a burnt sienna or a burnt umber is going to get you a nice grayed down blue. And the red also, it's more of a orangey, I guess you could say. It's got a little bit more orange in it, so it also grayed that blue down really nicely. Okay, so all that said, I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to put it up there so I can refer to it up at the top of my board. I'm working on Saunders Waterford, and it's a 140 cold press. A little bit of toothiness to it, which I like. I like to use gator board, and that's what I have this taped down to. It's just about a 1/2 inch thick, and with this one, I couldn't find this size, the size that I like, so I took a full 22 by 30, I think it is, and used a straight edged ruler and just sliced it in half, and there, voila, I've got a smaller board, which is great when I'm going outdoors painting because it's a little bit easier to carry. So let's get started painting this little scene. I want to try to limit the amount of brush strokes. I want to try to keep it simple. That's why I kind of tried to figure out this color palette beforehand so I could stay focused and not be wondering what color to grab next. When I've already got that figured out, I can be free to just focus on the painting part. So what I'll do first is grab this might not be big enough. This one is this is actually a brush I got at an Eric Weichart day painting retreat, I guess you could call her, workshop, and it's a number 12. It is a Kolinsky Sable. So the reason I'm picking this one is because it's big enough and it holds enough paint and water that I think I can get this sky in pretty easily, and I can work in between the buildings as well. So let's get some paint mixed up. I'm going to start with my sky, and I really want to get that in quickly and not go back into it after the first initial wash. That's my goal. So there's my cobalt, and here is cerulean mixed in with that. Both of those are a nice blues for the sunny sky that we've got here in this painting. And I think I'm trying to decide if I want to go get the paper wet first or just start slapping the color down. I want it to be fresh. I think what I'll do is come in down toward the bottom here. There's going to be a tree here, and I'll come right to that tree. And I don't want to go over that pole necessarily, so dab that out. My water's got a little bit of a tint to it already because I've been mixing my paint. And so I'm going to come right down to the bottom because I want I don't want any hard edges, so that's why I'm putting the paint down in between the buildings, so I can just concentrate on the upper part of the sky. I've got this paper towel close at hand because, if you haven't guessed it already, I want to control the amount of moisture on my brush. So I can do that. I can pick up some of that excess moisture and dab it off. I'm not too worried about the shadow side, so that paint can come right in. Let's come up here too. And right down to those trees. Okay, so got my brush full of water. I don't know why I do that. That's just a way I tend to work. I'm putting my paint down and grabbing more water as I go and spreading it around. And you see as I come down to, and I'm leaving some little light areas. I think that's nice. Pops of, like it could be a wispy cloud. And see how that's softening in here? And I like that hard edge that's happened right there. So I'm going to work around that, work around this pole. And I'm going to fade that so there's no hard line there at the top of that pole. This left side's going to be darker on the pole, so I'm not too worried if I get paint into that area. And I'm dropping in a little extra. I think it's gonna dry lighter. I do know that. So I want it to be blue enough. And I really do like how this is developing. You never know what watercolor's gonna do. So you just kind of have to let it do its thing. and not try to control it. I mean, one of the things that people always say, or you hear a lot, is that, oh, it's so hard, watercolor's so hard, you can't control it. Well, that's the beauty of it, right? Is the lack of control. If you let it just do its thing, so much can happen when you just let go. Boy, isn't that true in life in general? If you just let go. Okay, I like the way that's looking. So now while that's drying a little bit, I'm going to work on getting my tree mixture. And I've got a little yellow ochre over there that is going to be nice in some places. This is the Viridian, and it's a very unnatural green. It's not a green that you really see out in nature too much. Very bubbly. Because I'm working with dry paint, which I really like fresh paint better, but I've got it poured out here, so I don't want to grab any more. I don't have very big areas of trees. And as I'm sitting here looking at this sky, I think I want to just, with a very damp brush, soften some of those. Careful not to have too much water on my brush when I'm doing this, because it could cause blossoms that I don't want to happen. Same thing here, just a little softer edge on some of those. Okay, back to, and I'm going to stick with this brush now, which is my number 10 Utrecht. And going for that light red. You see how that naturalizes the green? So we've got a nice natural looking green. There's a little bit more Indian red. I want a bigger petal than I have right now, so I need to keep adding color until I get to the thickness of the paint and the bigness of the petal that I'm thinking. So there's a nice petal. Now let's grab some of the Viridian green again. Come over off to the side a little bit. And grabbing some Nicolazo yellow, I'm going to put right over here. And get myself a nice sunny green. So now that this is drier, this side is a little wetter than this side and this side, I can come right in and those trees are going to soften at the top because the paper is wet up there. So I want to just come right against that building. And then I'm going to pop in a little bit of the darker green as I come down. And I'll probably come back over the top of these with some brushwork toward the end of the painting. We'll see what happens. And then I can pop in a little extra Nicolazo yellow. This is starting to spread a little bit more than I want, so I'm just kind of blotting it with my paper towel. Clean that up a little bit. Thicker paint and it won't spread so far. It was a little too watery. A little more of that Nicolazo, just kind of dabbing it in. And the Nicolazo is a little bit more diluted, and so it's the water's gonna push the pigment away. I'm going to come over here next and starting with my brighter green, I'm going to come right up into that sky area. And right on the other side of the pole. So it looks like the pole is actually in front of the tree. I'm thinking about the shape too of what I'm painting. I want it to be an interesting shape. I don't want it to be a blob. So trying to leave a little sky hole in there and vary that color. And I'm going to grab some of the yellow ochre here at the bottom. Just plop that in. And then here is a little burnt umber. I'm going to grab some of that with a little touch of cobalt blue in it and just put in a little indication of the tree trunk. And I'm going to come right over that with my tree color. Those bubbles will end up popping, by the way. Okay, then I'm going to come right over here. I just realized I left out a roof line in here, but I'm going to improvise. I got some of that dark green off my brush because I want this lighter green to stand out a little bit more. A little bit more, and then I think I'm going to use some of that burnt umber in my green. That also will naturalize that, and then a little bit thicker. And then we're going to let those dry before moving on to the buildings. I'm really liking how my sky and my trees look. So now let's move on and start working on the building a little bit. I've spilled over into the white building with my sky, and I don't really want to leave that. So I'm going to take my number 2 Winsor & Newton stiff bristle brush and some clean water. Now you can get brushes that are meant for scrubbing, like I have. I have this little guy. It's a blender. It's called a blender, but let's see how it works. I really like the size of this one, but it's the same idea. It's a stiff bristle. You just take a little bit of moisture in there and you can dab it out. This is a little bit fatter this way, so I kind of like my Winsor & Newton, and it's a tiny bit softer. Sometimes I feel like that blender brush can can kind of damage the paper if you're not careful, so I'd rather not do that. And I'm going to just clean up a couple of little edges over here too, although I like the way this is kind of fading in and out, giving me a lost and found edge. And that might be kind of nice when we go back in and paint that post, because I don't want that to draw too much attention from the main subject, which is the buildings. So now that little spot is cleaned up, I'm going to go ahead and get my number 8 Princeton round and get some of this yellow ochre. I'm also going to grab a little bit of Hansa Yellow Light. It's got a little bit more of a greenish tint to it. I don't want to use that all by itself, so I'm going to mix the two of these together. brighten that yellow ochre up just a touch. And I also had thought to add a little bit of Opera Rose, which is a very strong color, so I want to be careful with how much I use. But the reason I'm mixing those colors up is because if you look at the picture closely enough, you can kind of, you've got to train your eye to see color. And in this photograph, I can pick up a touch of sunlit kind of yellow. So I want to indicate the sun, the light of the sun, that warmth. And so I'm going to do a little bit of it kind of over all those white areas of my barn. And adding a little reflected light under those eaves is also something I want to do. Now, it's really hard to see color in a photograph because it kind of flattens things out and you don't get what you are actually seeing in real life represented as accurately as you would wish, you would hope for. But all that to say, that's okay. I am playing and experimenting, not even necessarily experimenting, but just playing up the color. We don't want to just rely on what the picture or photograph is saying. So I'm just going to go over this with some water and not worrying about staying away from shadows or anything like that. I'm just going to get it wet. So when I come in and drop in the color, I think I might do a little bit over here too, even though that's going to be darker. Okay, so I've got some moisture on my paper and I'm just going to drop in some diluted color. You can already sense the light sunny day that this was, just from the brightness of the sky and the trees against this white building. It's already starting to get that mood, which I really am liking a lot. And as I put this down, I'm also thinking, okay, which way are these boards going? I think I'm going to follow the direction of that. This is a roof, so that's not going to really, that's going to be darker anyway. And I'm going to come right under this little eave here and add just a touch of that Opera Rose. I just feel like there was a little tiny bit of that in there, so of an orange color. And even right under here, there's going to be reflected light coming back under, even though that's away from the sun. We've got reflected light, so you can play that up by adding just touches here and there of that Opera Rose. Don't be afraid of color. Color is fun. And I didn't put any over here. Let's go add some yellow over there. And then we're going to let this dry before coming back over the top of it and before adding the shadows as well. Okay, so let's let this dry. Okay, so it's nice and dry. And I just realized when I said earlier that I was missing a roof line that no, I'm not. I don't know what this little squiggly is in there, but I'm going to erase it because that tree is actually supposed to come over into that area. That's like a pole right there. So I'm just going to dip back into my dry color and pretend like I did that from the beginning. Just fill in that little area all the way down. No big deal. And then that little thing right there, I think is a shoot of some sort that the grain went through. And just touch in a little bit of extra color there to kind of make them blend together. And right there was a little tiny speck of burnt umber, which you got to be careful of that, by the way. Sometimes our color gets, when it's dried, it kind of has crumbles in it. So make sure when you're mixing your puddle that if you see these little crumbles in there, that you mix it all up, because it can end up in your wash and then you have to figure out what to do about that, which, while we're on the topic, is had I not seen that and then seen it just a little bit later and tried to go in and get it out, you can cause all kinds of blossoms, which wouldn't be a bad thing in these trees. But if it's in the sky, I would recommend letting it dry completely and then just flicking it away when it's dry. Okay, so now we have a nice sunlit glow, and look what I just did. I just went right over the top of that with my hand. So if you ever do that, here's how you fix it. I just went right back over it with water, and I'm going to dab it out. And you actually won't even be able to tell that that happened, so no big deal. Okay, so next up, let's do the roof. I'm going to do the roof of this guy, which is gray. So what I'll do is get some burnt umber. Or remember, I could use burnt sienna, but I'm going to do burnt umber on this and mix up just a little bit of pigment for my gray roof. And I'm going to hold my brush on the side like this, and it's got a good amount of paint on it, but if I just kind of slide it, and then as I get closer to that edge, I came a little bit more up on the tip. And then I can touch in color, a little bit more of the gray, and just give that roof line some texture. And I wanted to do that first, actually, because when I come in with the shadow side, I want to make sure that I've got it dark enough. And if I have the roof line in, then I am going to be able to tell how dark I need that shadow side to be. So, and then I come up from that bottom edge, and I'm just kind of flicking, and it's on the side, so it's catching the bristles there. And then I can come in with a little more blue or gray, much more diluted, and touch in. I don't want to fill in all because there's going to be, I got a little yellow in there, so it kind of came out green. It's okay, dab it up a little bit. I got some of the yellow in there, that's why it kind of went green. And I'm following the lines, the angle of that roof. And then I can come right underneath there too, grab a little of that opera rose, put that in there, and just drag this right under the edge of that. kind of a broken line. Doesn't need to be thick. Because that roof line doesn't hang over that much. So I just darkened it up a little bit. Okay, so there's that roof. And then this one down here is a little bit browner. So this time I'm gonna get that a little bit browner. I accidentally grabbed some burnt orange. It's a little bit more orangey. And I'm gonna just come right over the top of this and carefully paint it in. And again, it's okay to leave some white of the paper and kind of play with that where the light might be hitting some of the tiles. I'm going to add a touch more of that burnt sienna. Not burnt sienna, burnt umber. Kind of darken up just a couple of little spots up there on the top and on the side. All right, and it looks like there's a roof over here. I'm going to use the same combination of colors, this time just a little bit more blue in it. And I'm going to get a thicker mixture. Because I want this little inside eave as I come down to be just a touch darker. There's a little roof up here. Little tiny shapes. I could probably go to a smaller brush, might be easier. Okay, so I think I'm liking that. I'll put a little bit more blue up there. I'm paying attention to the colors in the building or in the picture, and trying to just play up some of that. So where there's a little bit of blue in the roof back there, I just kind of touched in a little extra. And even there, I can dab in a little more blue. The roof is reflecting the sky. That has some, so actually this is a little roof line that's going back that way. So it's got some notches on it. There's a shadow right in there. We'll work on that in a minute. So I want these areas to be dry before I come right next to them and start painting in the other areas. I'm going to come back up here and just add a couple of flicks. Of my brush without getting carried away. And I don't want them to be like the same length and the same distance apart. We want to try to vary that up to make things interesting. I need to stop because that's the kind of stuff that you should play to do at the end. It's very tempting to start putting in detail before it's time. Okay, so I think that that's good. I'm going to add just a little bit of burnt umber down here to darken that Just a little bit more. Okay. Gonna let it dry. Okay, now I'm gonna work on this building, which is bluish gray, so I'm gonna stick with the same color. The thing that you have to do, or what I recommend doing, is squinting your eyes to try to determine the value of things. So when I squint my eyes, bring over the photograph again. When I squint my eyes, this is about the same value as these shadows. These are much darker. So these shadows need to be similar to this, similar. This is a little bit darker, I think. Squinting in my eyes, I can see that. But when you have your eyes wide open, it's a lot harder to see. So that said, I'm going to work on that. I want to get a little bit of that Indian red, or light red, excuse me. I keep on wanting to say Indian red. They're very similar. Maybe not right next to the yellow. Let's bring it over here. I just want to have a little bit to touch in because there's some rusty parts of this building. And I've just got a little bit of water. I'm going to avoid this window and those lighter areas. There's some panels or something there. So I'm going to avoid those. Getting it wet just gives you a little bit more time to work. So let's just drag your brush along there. I want to leave that post. I can come back in with gouache if I want to for that light side of that post, but I'd rather avoid it. I want this to have some texture, so I don't want to fill in every single little speck of white paper. Fairly dry brush. Coming right up to the top edge. I think I want to add a little pink in there. A little of that opera. Vary that up a little bit and give it some interest. Again, following that, I don't want to put it this way because actually the panels in that building are vertical. They're not horizontal. You'd be amazed at how many people, particularly starting out, you know, which is fine. You're in that learning process, but it's amazing how many people will go like this to fill in a circle when you want to be using the same form of the thing that you're painting. So if it's a round object, you don't want to be filling it in with straight lines. And if the panels are going vertical, you don't want to be filling in your color horizontally. Does that make sense? And then I'm coming up on the tip of my brush. I'm going to add a couple of little touches of that light red while it's still wet. And it's just going to blend. All right, so I do like that. And then over on this building here, there's it's like a chute, I guess you could say. It is a chute. And it just comes straight down and then at an angle. I'm going to play up the color on that a little bit. I think I want to go with the little bit more cerulean though. So similar value. let those dry. I don't want to come in next door to this because it's still wet. I don't want that dark color bleeding over here, and this is going to be much, much darker. So let's take a look at some other, there's a little bit of a roof line here. I'm going to start that one. It's going to be a bit darker than the shadow that's under that eave. And that's going to come all the way along this roof line, and that's actually darker than that roof. And I'm going to bring that right around underneath there. And if I squint, I'm seeing that this isn't quite dark enough, which is not a problem. We can even darken that up later too, as we add some of the final details. Keep sticking my hand in that, so I think I'll wait till that's a bit drier. Okay, I'm anxious to start on the shadow side. So I have squeezed out a little fresh for this mixture. I want to make sure it's dark enough. So I've got light red. I must be hungry. Light red is a Holbein color that I'm using, and also the ultramarine blue deep is also a Holbein. I really like the ultramarine deep. I see French ultramarine, ultramarine light, just plain ultramarine, but I like the extra darkness of the ultramarine deep, and I've so far I've only seen it by Holbein. So I'm gonna grab my number 6 brush, and the only reason I'm doing this on top of my painting like that is because I want you to be able to see this, but I wouldn't recommend mixing your paint on top. I've splattered so much paint on paintings by doing it that way, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I've got light red, and I'm just going to dip into this ultramarine, and I want it a thick mixture. I don't want it that red. It's a shadow side, so it's going to be cooler. You want your color temperature to be cooler. And so that is why I'm doing more blue. That light red is pretty intense. And also I want to add in probably, let's also do, I want to have a little bit of burnt orange here just to drop in like we did with some of that color under the eaves. But I'm going to add a little burnt umber. This is going to be not as fresh, and it's got those crumbles. Remember I was saying that? I want to make sure that I don't have those when I put it on my paper. So make sure that those are nice and dissolved. And then I'm getting a second dark color using the ultramarine deep and burnt umber. So what I'll do is I'm going to start with a little bit more blue in there. Start with going to a smaller brush for the tall building here. Number 4. Have my paper towel handy to make sure the moisture on my brush is the right level. I just dipped into the water so I could get it to spread a little bit more. And I'm just going to be bold and just add that color. Might be a little too dark. but I'm gonna dilute a little bit, add some blue, spread that out with my brush. It's not as dark as this building, so I don't want to get too dark on that. So I'm liking the blue on that. It's nice and dark. I do want to add just a touch of the light red for interest, so vary up the color. Maybe a little bit more blue here and there. You want your darks to be interesting, so having a variety in there by charging in other color is the way to achieve that. And I think I'll actually get a little bit of cobalt blue. I feel like there's a little bit of reflected light on this side of the, on this shadow side from the sky. It's kind of a metal siding as well, and so the light from the sky is hitting it. I'm just going to pick out just a little bit with my brush. Lift it out a little of that color. Squinting my eyes. It's going to dry lighter, so I need to remind myself of that. And I think that's going to do. So over here then we need to make this side a bit darker still. So I've got pretty much a neutral gray. I'm going to add a little bit more blue into that. You can see that. And then I've got my brush loaded up with just that blue mixture. And I'm going to come right over, coming up on the tip. I'm holding that brush down on the ferrule. Looks pretty dark right now, but as I spread this out, I'm going to be touching in some of the, rinsed my brush, some of the light red, and just adding that to my mixture there. Had a big glob of water. I don't know if you could see that, but dropped right off my brush. I wasn't paying close enough attention. And it didn't do any harm, but it's always important to pay attention to what's on your brush. It was right up there on the ferrule, so it just kind of dropped. Now this is a pretty dang thick. This is like a melty butter consistency that I put on here. Now I'm going to do similar what I did to over here. Getting my cobalt blue, I'm going to drop in just here and there. And also I want to do that with my light red. I've got a little bit more moisture. Make sure that driplet doesn't pop in there. And I'm just going to touch in a bit of a bit of that and create a little interest there. So now I'm going to drag just a little of that over here, so those two connect. All right, I am liking that. And over here, I'm just going to drop in a little bit of blue on that. Not a lot, but it seemed like a little bit of blue is on that panel. And then I'm going to fade it out a little bit. And rather than outline this window to make it stand out more, what I'll do as soon as this is dry is come alongside here and darken up some of the panels. But I'm liking where we've gone with the shadow side of this building. I'm just going to drop in a little bit of touch of water and let that kind of move the paint around a little bit. I can come right over here, since this is not totally connected, but it's a darker. I'm just going to come right there so those two can kind of fuse together. And then right underneath this is like a little overhang. I'm going to pop in a little bit of that burnt orange under there. Play with the reflected light. There's a building, part of that building back here, so I'm just going to bring that, kind of let that burnt orange bleed a little bit. And then this actually comes down more. That side of the building comes all the way down, pretty much. The truck was in the way in the picture, so it's kind of hard to tell what was going on there, but I'm just going to kind of start playing with adding marks. Don't know what's back there, but if you just do a little mark making, it kind of, you don't have to know what it is. It's just stuff back there. And I'm just going to add in a little of that yellow ochre kind of at the bottom to make it look like there's stuff back there. We don't know what the stuff is, right? And I'm going to call that good. Not do anything else in there right now. But we're going to let this fully dry before moving on. I tend to stick my hand in things, so smaller sections like this, if I'm coming over here to work on this building, I'm probably going to stick my hand in that. So I'm going to let it dry. Wise decision, right? I'm going to work on the shadows now of the rooftops here. And I'm trying to decide what to do. So painting in watercolor is there's a lot of problem solving. So I'm going to see what we get with a lighter version of this Indian red and cobalt blue mixture. I don't want these shadows as dark as this dark side of this building or the shadow up here. Again, squinting and looking at the value differences, this is quite a bit lighter. So the shadow that's being cast here has got to be believable. So I need to keep it light enough, but make it dark enough. Does that make sense? Not as easy as it seems, but let's give it a shot. There's my mixture right there. More blue, I can see already. I want more blue than I do the reddish. So I'm going to get a little bluer area off to the side here. We're going to keep it light and glowy. I'll be keeping a little bit of that Opera Rose there on my palette. And we're just going to have to go for it and see what happens. So I think I want to start this one. Oops, a little bit of pink on there. Start this by adding a streak of water there. It's yellow underneath, which that's going to come through. And I'm just going to vary up. And actually this is kind of coming up there too. Come down. Oops, that's way, way too blue. Spread that out a little bit. And a little bit more pink up there. I'm going to drop in a little bit of that yellow ochre to give me a glow. Touch in just the slightest bit up at the top there of a little bit thicker mixture. At the same time, I want to come over here. I need to make sure that I've got my paper towel handy so I can control the moisture on my brush. That's always going to be something you need to pay attention to. Touch in a little bit darker up there under the eave, even a little bit more up there. I like this little glowy area there. I'm going to attempt to keep that going. And I see it's too blue, so I'm going into the burnt umber part of it a little bit. I'm going to do just what I did over here. And I'm going to come right over here with my shadow. It's a little lighter over here, a little more glowiness under this roof line there. I'm going to come right here. There's a bit of a cast shadow there. There's just a little tiny crevice over here, so I'm going to add that right there. A little bit darker under this. And this side over here is also, this isn't going to have the reflected light so much. This is just going to be a cast shadow. So, and there's a cast shadow up here. That a little bit lighter. Little details. That little building or top, that little area up there is a bit in the shadow. So I think I like how that is. I love how I splatter all that paint all over. I can clean it up if I want. It's just in the sky, it's not a great thing to do, but if I just touch my brush on it, it's gonna help just make that disappear. There we go. Same thing here. All right, it's disappeared enough. Okay, so there's also a cast shadow up there. I missed that one. Okay, so I'm liking that. Let's do a little one. This is a little bit more brownish over here, however. I'm just going to come right along that edge. It's kind of a bluer or a browner shadow. I'm going to grab a way smaller brush, my Utrecht #1, and a very diluted, and we're just going to come right and under that. It's a little bit of a shadow from the sign. A little bit of a shadow on that. I'm graying that down just a bit with the cobalt mixture of light red and cobalt blue. This is actually casting a shadow this way, kind of from the corner. It's those little details that make it believable. There's a little shadows along the edge of the windows. Here's a sign over here. There's shadow cast from that at an angle. A little shadow inside this guy. You don't have to outline them. Just give enough and the viewer's eyes will fill in the rest. It's really starting to come to life. How about we start doing some of these windows? Like a little burnt orange in there. Put a little flick of the brush right there. It doesn't have to be anything more than just a flick or two. I'm liking the feel of this. A little bit of a roof line up here. I'm going to just kind of fade that so it's not such a hard line, just a soft edge there. I'm going to bring in a little Carbazzo Violet and a little ultramarine blue to that. I want an interesting dark, and I still have this teeny tiny little brush because I'm working in very teeny tiny little spaces. This is fairly dark in here. A little flick of my brush. Touch that in. And to make it look like maybe there's something inside those windows. And maybe it's reflecting the sky a little bit. It's such a tiny little spot, but just adding a touch of color. Just dropped in a little bit of blue and let those kind of blend away. Now this one, I'm going to add my water first, and then I'm going to drop in my color. And there is stuff in the window. You can see it. I like how that looks. I don't want to do too much to take away what I just did there. So just really quick little marks. It looks like there's stuff in that window. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Different colors, added variety, a little bit of purple. Water to soften. It's a little too much Indian red there. Blot that out. A little carried away with that. And then this is a door with glass panels. So I'm gonna, it's kind of a reddish. And let's come up to this window. I'm going to go with a little bit of blue. Darker over here. The light's coming this way, so the left side of that window is going to be hit with the reflection of the sky. And this side over here is going to be darker. And we're just going to be flicking the brush to fill, indicate some of these shadows. This is like a little ledge right there. There's a little ladder that goes up here. All with this little brush, just keeping it really loose. And this is a little curtain inside here, so I'm gonna come right along the top of the curtain, right underneath that where the window sill is, and just